It was the coughing fits that started it. Violent and sudden, they rattled through my chest like a jackhammer, leaving me gasping for breath. By the time I finally saw a doctor, they diagnosed it as pneumonia. The word felt heavier than the sickness itself. Pneumonia. It sounded like a disease from a Civil War memoir. I didn't have time to get sick, but here I was, sidelined and sentenced to convalescing in bed for weeks. At first, Emily seemed supportive. She filled my prescriptions, brought me soup in bed, and even started sleeping in the guest room to avoid catching it herself. She joked that my snoring had evolved into dying walrus noises, and promised she'd send an audition tape to the Discovery Channel. I appreciated her humor, even if it hurt to laugh. But after the first week, something shifted. The clues were small at first. Emily started spending more time out of the house. Something about helping her friend Lisa move furniture or heading to the gym for stress relief. One night, as I shuffled into the kitchen for water, I noticed her hunched over her phone at the dining table, typing furiously. When I asked who she was texting, she quickly locked the screen and smiled at me like I'd caught her sneaking cookies. "Just Lisa," she said, too casually. Her smile lingered a moment too long. A few days later, our neighbor Mark stopped by. Mark was one of those overly friendly types who seemed to have no filter. He was the kind of guy who always asked questions that were a little too personal, like, "Why don't you guys have kids yet?" Or, "Is your mortgage interest rate killing you too?" This time, Mark's question was innocent enough, but his tone made my stomach tighten. "Hey, how's Emily doing? Saw her over at Sully's the other night. She looked like she was having fun." Sully's was a bar about 10 miles away. Emily hadn't mentioned anything about going there. "Oh, yeah," I mumbled, caught off guard. "I think she went out with Lisa." Mark raised an eyebrow, and for once, he didn't follow up with another nosy comment. He just gave me a long look before saying, "Well, tell her I said hi. Take care of yourself, man." That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of Emily laughing at Sully's. My mind went into overdrive, piecing together a narrative that made too much sense. Her late-night texts, the sudden errands, the way she'd been wearing perfume to run to Target. I tried to dismiss the thoughts as paranoia. I mean, what did I have to go on? Mark's vague comment? The fact that my wife wanted to smell nice? But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it started to grow. The next morning, while Emily was out helping Lisa again, I opened my laptop and logged into our family phone account. I felt ridiculous snooping like this. It wasn't who I was, but curiosity overpowered my guilt. It didn't take long to find something strange. Emily had called a number repeatedly over the past few weeks, sometimes late at night when she thought I was asleep. The contact wasn't saved in her phone, but the area code was local. That night, I decided to test her. "Hey, Em," I said, feigning nonchalance from the couch. My voice was still raspy, and talking too much made me cough, but I powered through. "What's Lisa's number? I wanted to thank her for helping you out so much lately." Emily froze for a split second, just enough for me to notice. "Oh, she's kind of weird about giving out her number. I can just tell her you said thanks." Her explanation was smooth, but my stomach churned. If she was lying, she was good at it. "Sure," I said, hiding my suspicion. "That's fine." Emily smiled and kissed me on the forehead before retreating to the guest room. Couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying every interaction with Emily over the past month. Every odd comment or unexplained absence. I knew I should trust her. She was my wife, after all. But something felt off. Around midnight, I shuffled to the kitchen for tea. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I glanced out the window and noticed something strange. Emily's car wasn't in the driveway. It was nearly 12:30 a.m. Where the hell had she gone? My chest tightened, not from the pneumonia, but from the realization that my suspicions weren't just paranoia anymore. I stood at the window for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty driveway. My breath came in short, uneven gasps, partly from the pneumonia, partly from the panic building in my chest. Where the hell could Emily be? 1,000 scenarios ran through my head, each one worse than the last. Maybe she'd just gone to pick up something at the store. Maybe Lisa had called her for help. But then, why not tell me? When Emily's car finally pulled into the driveway nearly an hour later, I shuffled back to bed and forced myself to lie still. My heart was pounding, and I had to breathe carefully to avoid another coughing fit. I heard her come in quietly, her keys jingling as she tiptoed through the house. She didn't check on me. The next morning, I pretended I hadn't noticed anything. Emily was as chipper as ever, chatting about how Lisa's breakup drama had kept her out late. "Oh, you wouldn't believe the meltdown she had last night," Emily said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She avoided my eyes, focusing on stirring sugar into her mug. "What happened?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "She ran into her ex at Sully's. Total disaster." Emily's laugh sounded forced. "Sully's again." My jaw tightened, but I forced a smile. "Sounds rough. You're a good friend for being there for her." She glanced at me, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe. Or maybe I was just seeing what I wanted to see. Later that day, I called Mark. I needed to know more about what he'd seen at Sully's. "Mark, hey, it's Ryan. Got a second?" "Sure, buddy. What's up?" I hesitated, unsure how to phrase it without sounding crazy. "You mentioned seeing Emily at Sully's the other night. Do you remember who she was with?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Look, man, I don't want to stir up any trouble," Mark said finally. My stomach sank. "Just tell me." "Well, she wasn't with Lisa, if that's what you're wondering. She was with some guy." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did he look like?" "I don't know, mid-30s, dark hair, kinda stocky. They were sitting at the bar, laughing, having a good time. I didn't think much of it." That night, Emily left again, claiming she was going to Lisa's to watch a movie. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my laptop and logged into the family tracking app. It was something we'd installed a while back for emergencies, mostly so I could see if she was safe when driving late at night. The app showed her car heading west, away from Lisa's house. I stared at the screen, watching the blinking dot move further and further from where she said she'd be. After about 20 minutes, the car stopped in a parking lot. I zoomed in on the map. Sully's. I spent the next day trying to act normal, but my mind was a mess. Emily was lying to me, about Sully's, about Lisa, about everything. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner. By the time Mark stopped by in the afternoon, I was desperate for someone to talk to. "Hey, Ryan," Mark said, leaning against the doorframe. "You feeling any better?" "Not really," I admitted. "But thanks for asking." Mark gave me a sympathetic look. "Man, you've been through it, huh? You need anything? Groceries? Someone to keep you company?" I hesitated, then blurted out, "Can I ask you something? And I need you to be honest." Mark's expression shifted. He straightened up, his usual casual demeanor replaced with something more serious. "Of course. What's going on?" "You saw Emily at Sully's. Was she with someone?" Mark sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Ryan, I don't want to get in the middle of anything. But yeah, she was with a guy. They looked close." "Close how?" My voice cracked, and I hated how weak I sounded. "They were sitting real close, talking, laughing. At one point, he put his hand on her back." Mark hesitated, then added, "It didn't look like just friends, man. I'm sorry. I didn't sleep that night." The image of Emily at Sully's with some stranger played over and over in my head. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, but a small part of me held back. What if I was wrong? What if I accused her of something and ruined our marriage for nothing? The next morning, Emily left early, saying she had errands to run. As soon as she was gone, I went out to her car. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I felt like I had to do something. The first place I checked was the glove compartment. It was stuffed with receipts, napkins, and an old pack of gum. I was about to give up when something caught my eye. A second phone, tucked beneath a stack of papers. My heart pounded as I picked it up. It wasn't her usual phone. This one was cheap, the kind you'd buy at a gas station. I powered it on, and the screen lit up with a notification. Message from TK. My stomach dropped. The message preview read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" I stared at the phone, my hands trembling. My wife had a burner phone. She was texting someone who clearly wasn't just a friend. And now I had a name, or at least initials. TK. Who the hell was TK? I sat in Emily's car, gripping the burner phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The message from TK stared back at me, mocking the life I thought I had. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? My breath hitched, and I started coughing. A dry, hacking fit that made my chest feel like it was on fire. For a moment I thought I might pass out. But I didn't. The anger kept me upright, kept me sharp. I shouldn't have been surprised. Not after the Sully's incident and the late-night Lisa excuses. But seeing the proof in my hands was like a gut punch. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was real. The phone's passcode was a simple 4-digit code. I tried her birthday first. 0625. Locked. Then our anniversary. 1008. Nothing. I clenched my jaw, thinking about how careless Emily must have been to leave the phone in the car. I couldn't tell if she was arrogant, lazy, or simply didn't care if she got caught. I tried one last number, her mother's birthday, 0412, and the phone unlocked. My heart pounded as I opened the messaging app. There were dozens of messages between Emily and TK, their conversations going back weeks. Most of them were playful, flirty, too flirty. TK. Thinking about you all morning. You looked so hot in that dress last night. Emily. You're bad. Winky face, but thanks. You didn't look so bad yourself. My stomach churned as I scrolled further. The messages got worse. TK. I hate sneaking around, but it's worth it every time. Emily. Me too. I wish it could be simpler, but you know how it is. I slammed the phone down on the passenger seat, my breathing ragged. The texts didn't just confirm my suspicions, they blew them wide open. Emily wasn't just lying to me. She was living a completely separate life behind my back. I sat there for a while, staring out the windshield. My mind raced with questions. Who was TK? How long had this been going on? Did she love him? Did she still love me? I felt pathetic sitting in her car, snooping like some amateur detective. But what else could I do? Emily wouldn't tell me the truth if I asked her outright. She'd lie like she'd been doing for weeks, maybe months. Eventually, I composed myself and searched the phone for more clues. I checked the call log, but TK's number was the only recurring one. No saved photos, no emails, no social media apps, just texts and calls. She was covering her tracks, but not well enough. Then I noticed something else. There was a calendar app and it had been used to mark specific dates. I opened it and saw that Emily had set up appointments over the past few weeks, each one with a single initial, T. I recognized one of the dates immediately. It was the same night Mark had seen her at Sully's. Emily returned home about an hour later, carrying a bag of groceries. I was back in bed, pretending to scroll through my laptop. Hey, she said, poking her head into the bedroom. You doing okay? Need anything? Her voice was casual, warm even, but it grated on me like nails on a chalkboard. No, I'm good, I said, keeping my tone even. She smiled and set the groceries down in the kitchen. Lisa says hi, by the way. She's thinking of you. I clenched my fists under the blanket. She was still lying, still playing the role of the caring wife. Oh, that's nice, I said. Tell her I appreciate it. That night I couldn't take it anymore. After Emily fell asleep in the guest room, I grabbed her primary phone and checked her messages. It was risky. She could wake up at any moment, but I needed more answers. Her phone was clean, of course. No messages from TK, no incriminating calls. But when I checked her social media apps, I found something strange. She'd recently unfollowed a guy named Tom Kennedy. TK. Couldn't be a coincidence. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. I Googled Tom Kennedy and found his LinkedIn profile. He was a regional sales manager for some HVAC company. His profile picture was blurry, but it fit Mark's description. Mid-30s, dark hair, stocky build. He lived 2 towns over. The pieces started falling into place. Tom wasn't some random stranger. He was the same guy we'd met at a barbecue back in July. a coworker of one of Emily's friends. I remembered him being overly friendly, laughing too loudly at Emily's jokes. At the time, I chalked it up to him being drunk. Now, I realized it was something else entirely. I spent the rest of the day planning my next move. I wanted to confront Emily, but I knew I needed more proof. Something she couldn't deny or talk her way out of. That evening, when Emily left to help Lisa with some housework, I tracked her car again. Sure enough, she went straight to Sully's. I grabbed my keys and followed her. I parked down the street from Sully's and waited. It didn't take long to spot her through the window, sitting at the bar with Tom Kennedy. They were leaning in close, laughing, their body language intimate. My blood boiled as I watched Tom place his hand on her thigh. She didn't pull away. I wanted to burst in there, grab him by the collar, and demand an explanation. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to think. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures of them through the window. When Emily came home later that night, I was sitting in the living room, waiting. "How's Lisa?" I asked casually as she walked through the door. "Oh, she's good," Emily said, setting her bag down. "Tired, though. We cleaned out her entire attic. You wouldn't believe how much junk she's been hoarding." I nodded, my face blank. "Sounds exhausting," I said. "You should get some rest." "Yeah, I'm beat." She kissed me on the forehead, like she always did, and headed to the guest room. As soon as the door closed, I pulled up the pictures on my phone. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the lies or the fact that she thought I was stupid enough to believe them. The next morning felt heavier than usual. I stayed in bed longer than I should have, my mind replaying the scene from Sully's like a cruel movie on loop. Emily at the bar, leaning in close to Tom Kennedy, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, I was at home coughing my lungs out, wondering if my marriage was collapsing. Turns out, it wasn't a question anymore, it was a fact. She was cheating on me. Now, I just had to decide what to do about it. By mid-afternoon, Emily was bustling around the house like everything was fine. She wore one of those flowy cardigans she loved, her hair tied in a messy bun, looking effortlessly beautiful. It made me sick to think how easily she could slip between being my wife and being whatever she was to Tom. "Hey," she said, leaning against the doorframe of our bedroom. "Lisa's hosting a wine night tonight. I think I'm gonna head over there for a couple of hours. You good on your own?" I bit the inside of my cheek, trying not to let the anger show. "Yeah, I'll be fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Enjoy yourself." "Thanks, babe," she said, flashing me a quick smile. She turned and walked away, and I wanted to scream, but instead, I reached for my phone. The plan was simple. I'd wait until she left, track her phone to wherever she was really going, and catch her in the act. No more doubts, no more guessing games. Around 6:30, Emily came into the bedroom, fully dressed and with her purse slung over her shoulder. "I'll be back by 10, okay?" she said. I nodded, feigning exhaustion. "Sure. Have fun." She leaned down and kissed my forehead. I wanted to flinch but forced myself to stay still. "Love you," she said. The words hung in the air like a bad joke. As soon as she left, I opened the family tracking app. Sure enough, she wasn't heading to Lisa's house. Instead, her car was heading toward the outskirts of town, the same direction as the motel near the freeway. My chest tightened as I watched the blinking dot come to a stop. I zoomed in on the map, Midtown Motor Lodge. It was like something out of a bad movie, but this was my life now. I grabbed my keys and left. The motel was a dingy, single-story building with flickering neon lights and a parking lot full of beat-up cars. I parked a few spots down from Emily's car and sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know if I was going to confront him, or just watch. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in the car. I stepped out and made my way toward the main office, keeping to the shadows. The woman at the front desk didn't even look up from her phone when I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone bored. "Yeah," I said, clearing my throat. "I'm supposed to meet someone here, but I forgot the room number." "Emily Wilkes? She checked in recently." The woman sighed and tapped on her computer. Room 14, she said. Thanks, I muttered, turning back toward the lot. My hands were shaking as I approached room 14. The curtains were drawn, but the faint sound of laughter came through the thin walls. I felt like I was going to be sick. I pressed my ear to the door. You're so bad, Emily said, her voice playful and slightly muffled. Only because you bring it out in me, a man replied. I didn't need to hear any more. My fists clenched, and for a moment, I considered kicking the door in. But instead, I took out my phone. I snapped a picture of the door, the room number clearly visible, and then took a deep breath. My hands were steady now, my rage settling into something cold and calculated. I knocked on the door. There was a brief pause, and then Emily's voice called out, "Who is it?" "It's me," I said, my voice calm but firm. Another pause. I could practically hear the panic on the other side of the door. The sound of hurried whispers, the shuffle of movement. Then the door cracked open, and Emily peeked out. Her face went pale when she saw me. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my tone icy. "What are you doing here, Emily?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Ryan, I can explain." "Can you?" I cut her off. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty obvious what's going on." Before she could respond, Tom appeared behind her, shirtless and looking like a deer in headlights. "Oh, hey," he said, his voice cracking. I laughed, but it was bitter and hollow. "Hey? That's all you've got to say? Hey!" Emily stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her as if that would somehow make this less humiliating. "Ryan, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Let's talk about this." "Talk about what, Emily? The fact that you've been sneaking around behind my back? That you've been lying to me for weeks? Or maybe you want to explain why you're in a motel room with him while I'm at home, sick, wondering if you still give a damn about me." She started to cry, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not this time. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. I shook my head, my anger boiling over. "You didn't mean for it to happen? What, you just tripped and fell into his arms? Into his bed?" Tom peeked out from behind the door, looking like he wanted to say something, but I silenced him with a glare. "Don't," I said, pointing at him. "You don't get to say a damn thing." He disappeared back into the room. Emily reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't get to play the victim here, Emily. Not after this." She sobbed harder, but I couldn't bring myself to care. "You've made your choice," I said, turning to leave. "Now you'll have to live with it." As I walked back to my car, the weight of what had just happened hit me like a freight train. My marriage was over. I sat in my car outside the motel for what felt like hours, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The conversation replayed in my head on an endless loop. Emily's tears, her weak excuses, and that pathetic look on Tom Kennedy's face. Couldn't go home yet. Not like this. The air in the car felt suffocating, heavy with anger and betrayal. I rolled down the window, letting the cool night breeze hit my face. For the first time in days, my coughing stopped. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house felt like a stranger to me. The warm glow from the windows mocked me, as if it still belonged to a happy couple who had built a life together. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Emily was sitting on the couch, waiting for me. Her eyes were swollen, her face blotchy from crying. She didn't look up as I walked in. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I ignored her, heading straight to the kitchen to pour myself a drink. My hands shook as I opened the bottle of whiskey we'd been saving for a special occasion. I figured tonight qualified. "Ryan, please," she said louder this time. "We need to talk." I turned around, holding the glass like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. "You want to talk?" I said, my voice icy. "Fine, let's talk." She flinched but didn't look away. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, thick and unbearable. Finally, she broke it. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. It just did. I let out a bitter laugh. That's the second time you've said that tonight. You didn't mean for it to happen? What does that even mean, Emily? Did Tom accidentally fall into your motel bed? Stop it, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I snapped, slamming the glass down on the counter. Explain it to me. Make me understand how my wife, the woman I've spent the last 8 years of my life with, decided to betray me while I was sick in bed. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I didn't plan it, she said through her sobs. I swear, it just started with texts. He was there for me when I felt alone. Alone, I repeated, my voice rising. You were alone? Are you kidding me? I've been here the whole time, Emily. Even when I was coughing my lungs out, I was still here for you. She shook her head. It's not that simple. Then make it simple, I said, taking a step closer. How long has this been going on? Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. How long? I demanded, my voice like a whip. 2 months, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 months. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady myself. 2 months, I repeated, more to myself than to her. Jesus Christ. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. Then why didn't you stop? I asked, my voice hoarse. If you didn't want to hurt me, why did you keep going back to him? To Sully's? To the goddamn motel? She didn't have an answer. She just sat there, sobbing into her hands. For a long time, I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew. The woman who had promised to love me through sickness and health. Finally, I spoke. Do you love him? Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face full of panic. What? No, of course not. Then why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why risk everything for someone you don't even love? She hesitated, and in that moment, I saw the truth in her eyes. Because I was tired, she said finally. Tired of feeling like we were just existing. Tired of feeling like your nurse instead of your wife. Tom made me feel alive. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I staggered back, gripping the counter for support. So this is my fault, I said, my voice dripping with bitterness. Because I got sick? Because I wasn't enough for you? That's not what I'm saying, she said quickly. Then what are you saying, Emily? I shouted. Because all I'm hearing is excuses. The silence returned, heavier than before. Emily wiped her eyes, her lips trembling as she struggled to find the right words. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said finally. I was going to end it. I swear. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. You were going to end it? That's rich. Was that before or after your next date at the motel? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I downed the rest of my whiskey in one gulp, the burn in my throat doing little to numb the ache in my chest. I can't do this, I said, setting the glass down. Ryan, please, she said, standing up. We can work through this. We can go to therapy. We can fix this. Fix this, I repeated, shaking my head. Emily, you didn't just break our marriage. You burned it to the ground. I still love you, she said desperately. I laughed, but it was hollow. Do you? Because it doesn't feel like love to me. It feels like betrayal. For a moment, she just stood there, tears streaming down her face. Then she took a tentative step toward me. Ryan, she said softly, please, don't give up on us. I stared at her, my chest tightening with a mix of anger, pain, and something else I couldn't quite name. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally. Her face crumpled, and she let out a choked sob. Please, she whispered. I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving her standing there in the living room. In the darkness of the bedroom, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her words echoed in my head. I still love you. I was tired. He made me feel alive. I didn't know what hurt more, the affair itself or the fact that she thought she could explain it away with cheap excuses. As I drifted off to sleep, one thing became clear. Whatever happened next, things would never be the same. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt like a tomb. Emily was in the kitchen, quietly making coffee, as if trying not to disturb the tension hanging in the air. I stayed upstairs, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of our conversation from the night before. 2 months. I kept coming back to that number, over and over. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a fleeting lapse in judgment. It was a conscious choice she'd made again and again. By the time I finally got up and went downstairs, Emily was sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up when she saw me, her face a mix of hope and dread. "Hey," she said softly. I ignored her and walked to the kitchen. The silence between us was deafening. "Are you going to say anything?" she asked finally, her voice breaking the stillness. "What do you want me to say, Emily?" I replied without turning around. "That it's fine? That I forgive you? That we can just go back to the way things were?" "No," she said quickly. I want to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling." I turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "What I'm thinking is that I don't even know who you are anymore. And what I'm feeling is like I've been stabbed in the back by the person I trusted most in the world." She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I hurt you," she said, "but I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "Fix us? Emily, you had 2 months to stop this. 2 months to fix us before it got to this point. And now, suddenly, you want to try? Why now?" "Because I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "A terrible mistake. But I love you, Ryan. I don't want to lose you." Her words should have meant something, but they didn't. They felt hollow, like everything else she'd said since this nightmare began. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice low. Her face crumpled, and she started to cry. "Please, Ryan," she whispered. "Don't give up on us. I'll do whatever it takes, therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what to do." I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger, pain, and confusion. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her she didn't deserve a second chance. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, despite everything, wanted to believe she meant it. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "You want to fix this? Then we'll go to therapy. But I'm not making any promises. If I don't feel like I can trust you again, I'm done. Do you understand?" She nodded quickly, wiping her tears. "Yes, I understand. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said coldly. "This isn't forgiveness. It's a chance. And it's the only one you're going to get." The first therapy session was awkward, to say the least. Emily was eager to talk, to explain herself, but I wasn't ready to hear her excuses again. The therapist, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Klein, tried to mediate, but I spent most of the hour staring at the floor, barely listening. "I felt invisible," Emily said at one point, her voice cracking. "I didn't feel like a wife anymore. I felt like a caregiver. Like all I was to him was someone to bring him soup and medicine." Dr. Klein turned to me. "Ryan, how does that make you feel?" I looked up, my jaw tight. "It makes me feel like she's blaming me for getting sick. Like my pneumonia was such a burden that she had no choice but to cheat." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" I snapped. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to explain it. I wasn't thinking. I was selfish. I was wrong." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Yeah, you were." After the session, we drove home in silence. Emily kept glancing at me, as if trying to gauge my mood, but I didn't give her anything to work with. I didn't know how I felt. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of us at the beach, at barbecues, at family gatherings. We looked so happy, so in love. How had it come to this? Over the next few weeks, we continued therapy. Slowly, painfully, we started talking again. Emily was honest about the affair, answering every question I asked, no matter how uncomfortable. Yes, we slept together, she admitted one night after a particularly brutal session. Twice. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. But I nodded. I'd asked for the truth, and now I had it. One night, after another session, Emily sat next to me on the couch, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Do you think we'll make it? She asked quietly. I stared at the TV, my chest tight. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm trying, but I don't know. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll keep trying, she whispered, for as long as it takes. In the end, the decision came down to one simple question. Could I ever trust her again? I thought about it constantly, weighing the memories of our life together against the pain of her betrayal. One morning, as I stood in the kitchen making coffee, Emily walked in and gave me a tentative smile. For the first time in months, it didn't feel forced. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness. Maybe it wasn't even hope. But it was a start.